Hey y'all, this is Gordon Runyon. Thank you for listening. I'm here to present you the results of some of my research into the phenomenon called QAnon. What is QAnon? Is it a cult? Is it a false religion? Is it something far less than that? Uh, is it a psyop? What is it? And right off the bat, I want to tell you that's not an easy question to answer because, like other things in the internet age, specifically people who are in travel in my group, you will you will understand that there exist several things that people like to label as organizations or groups that really defy that definition because they're so decentralized. The AHA, abolish human abortion. One of the things that seems to make people's head explode is the idea that there's no centralized leader, there's nobody really calling the shots, and that every local AHA chapter and even individual AHA adherents don't necessarily follow the same program, or they're certainly not being ordered around by anybody. I think, frankly, the same thing is true of Black Lives Matter. Anyone who thinks that the owners of a website who claim to be Marxist, anyone who thinks they're calling the shots, well, you're just crazy. It's a decentralized organization, and each group you find is going to have its own differences and its own emphasis. In the same way, when you get to trying to discuss QAnon, it's very decentralized, except for where they're getting their initial information from. And we'll talk about that. So it lacks all the earmarks that you would normally attach to a cult. Go to any textbook that's trying to talk about cults or define them. QAnon really doesn't fit any of those definitions because there is no centralized authority, and that's basically going to disqualify you from being a cult. So QAnon, not really an organization. It's very decentralized, and one of the aspects I want to emphasize as I move into talking about it more is that one of the things this decentralization does is it ensures that there's no uniformity within the phenomenon. That's what I'm calling it. It's a phenomenon. There's no uniformity, and you may meet someone who claims to be a QAnon adherent, but they would disagree with a bunch of others. And you can certainly find some QAnon videos on YouTube, for instance, that are that I think other QAnon believers would say are very extreme. And so you're going to find mild, and the flavor runs from mild to hot across the spectrum, and you're just going to have to figure that out when you encounter it. So I don't mean to slander anybody by labeling them QAnon. I'm not that's not what I'm here to do. My one thing that I did find interesting is that QAnon has the distinction of being the first conspiracy theory to be labeled as a domestic terror threat by the FBI. That is kind of interesting. And historically, it's not without precedent, even within the QAnon times. QAnon's only been around for about as long as Donald Trump's been the president. And even in that period of time, there was the one incident of the shooting at a business called Comet Pizza. And QAnon as a whole kind of became convinced that this business, Comet Pizza, was a front for a ring of pedophiles who were torturing and probably ultimately cannibalizing children, little babies and stuff like that. So because they were convinced that that was the case, and then when after predictions had been made that the authorities were going to take down Comet Pizza and they never did, well, one of the QAnon believers who really thought this was true decided he had to take matters into his own hands, and he went in there to shut them down and really kill them. He's going to make sure to save all the babies. And, if you really think that's true, well, he goes in there and he fires. I don't think he winds up actually killing anybody, but he takes a shot or two, and big deal. They come and arrest him, and he tells this story that this is the front for pedophile stuff, and it turns out it's not. It's a pizza place. There's no hidden room or anything like that, or anything nefarious like that is going on. And generally, if you look at church history, the history of cults, especially end times cults and rapture cults and stuff like that, people who really thought that the coming of Christ was right around the corner, and they sell all their stuff and they go out on a hill and wait for Jesus when their leader says he's going to come and he doesn't, and then the resultant actions by those groups can be violent. At the very least, the people in the groups are generally very disappointed, and they become disaffected and don't want to have anything to do with religion or something like that. But some of them actually get violent and become desperate, and you see that in like the Jim Jones fiasco in Africa, where all the people drank the Kool-Aid and died, and the Hale-Bopp Comet was, well, that was a little bit different thing, but the cult members all decided that the only way to make the prophecies come true was to kill themselves, and so there's some reason to be worried if a cult or if a group that believes it's living in the end times eventually becomes disappointed because those prophecies don't come true. There's generally some trouble to deal with on the other side of that. Okay, so I would tell you that I believe that QAnon is maybe most fitly described as simply an internet phenomenon, a conspiracy theory that lives exclusively on the internet, but in fact it's now influencing national politics. QAnon tweets get retweeted by the president and by members of the president's staff. In fact, I saw one count that estimates that the president has retweeted, by the time of the writing of the article, he had retweeted at least 216 tweets that could be traced back to a QAnon account. And another researcher found that in the last primary season, the one we just came out of, that there were at least 26 congressional candidates who at least claim some adherence to the QAnon theories. Okay, so how does this work? Well, the basic operation is that there's this enigmatic figure, and that's a hard word to say. There's this mysterious figure called Q, and nobody knows who he is, but the theory is that he's really super high up in the Trump organization. He's either a senior military official or he's in intelligence or something like that. But anyway, he has access to information that nobody else does. And Q periodically comes online and makes these, they're called drops. They're Q drops. They're cryptic messages that he sends out for all of his followers. Some are more cryptic than others, of course, but then what happens is that all the people who buy into this and believe he is what he's rumored to be, these QAnon folks, they kind of set about at that point trying to figure out what the cryptic message means. And they become detectives. It's like a little bit of an internet treasure hunt. They're trying to draw connections between what Q says and something nefarious that might be going down. In fact, they do the same thing. QAnon folks kind of tend to do the same thing with everything the president does, everything he tweets. Maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit later, but they'll do things like assume that if he misspells a word in a tweet, then the president must be sending out a secret message, and it's up to the QAnon people who are enlightened to then get on their computer and do the research and figure out why he would have spelled this word wrong or use bad grammar or something like that. And they're trying to discover the hidden messages in there. And then QAnons who think they found something, then what they do is they go online on social media and discuss what they found. And many of them put videos on YouTube and stuff. There are a couple of videos that you could watch that I think are pretty interesting. One I had recommended to me as kind of the basis of the QAnon theory is called Out of Shadows, and it's one man's testimony of coming to realize that the world isn't what it seems to be, and that evil people really do get together in the shadows and do bad things and plot evil things, and it's very much a conspiracy theory sort of video. The thing that makes it potent is that many of the conspiracy theories that are featured there are things that the government has since then owned up to. Things like Project Paperclip and MK Ultra and Mockingbird, things that we know now. They used to maybe just be theories, but you can actually go online and download the congressional information about these things. So it is very powerful in that sense, that all these things that he didn't know and he would have thought they were tinfoil hat things, turns out they're true, and that then it also points out that it points out how connected all the mass media is that we consume, and how it looks like we have all this diversity, but there are really about half a dozen corporations that own all the media, and they seem to all kind of want to be saying the same things and promoting the same agenda. So Out of the Shadows leaves you with this feeling that, wow, the world isn't like I thought it was, and what's going on here? And I think that then makes you ripe to hear and be influenced by what I'm going to call the QAnon meta-narrative, which we're just about to talk about. But the other video series that I would recommend to you is a 10-part thing called The Fall of the Cabal. The Fall of the Cabal, Cabal. And especially if you don't want to go through 10 episodes, just look at the last two, number 9 and number 10. And that's where you're going to get into really some of the far out there stuff as far as QAnon theories go. And, that's where you're going to see that when QAnon critics get upset about the fact that QAnon folks seem to worship and idolize President Trump, well, there's some evidence for that. And some of it's really pretty shocking, and it would be just laughable if these things weren't influencing actual politics, and some of the things that QAnon says and QAnon language finds its way into conservative Christian churches, which is really what made me want to look into this. Okay, so I mentioned the QAnon meta-narrative. And I'm talking about the fact that what makes QAnon kind of a unique conspiracy theory is that it's the conspiracy theory that encapsulates and connects every other conspiracy theory. So you've got like an umbrella story, and underneath that umbrella you have all these different conspiracy theories like 9/11 truth, or Obama's birth certificate, or JFK assassination, or 9/11. So you've got whatever it is, all chemtrails, whatever your conspiracy theory is. QAnon's got a story that puts all those things together under one umbrella. And that story is that the world is dominated by a secret society of cannibalistic pedophiles. The rich and powerful in the world are very likely kind of all involved in this Illuminati sort of organization that rules the world. They've got all the power, and they are the ones responsible for all the evil that exists in the world. And many celebrities that you know are labeled as being part of this cabal, like Tom Hanks and many politicians from the past, like President Clinton. Now there's the thing that makes this sticky is that there's some there's some things that are true. There are some factual pieces here that QAnon takes advantage of, like the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing and Epstein's Island, and we know for a fact that a lot of rich and powerful people flew out to Epstein's Island, the pedophile Disneyland, and that's not in question. That did happen. But what QAnon does is it takes factual stuff like that and fits it into their meta narrative and makes it all connect. And so, like I say, you've got this group of pedophiles that run everything. They rule the world, and they're generally operating in secret and getting away with everything. But at some point, the kind of cosmic powers of good, whatever they may be, some of them, some QAnons believe they're talking about the Christian God here, and will use some biblical language, but generally, whatever that is, it's like just whatever your general conception of the good God is. QAnon theory says that this force for good has decided that now's the time to overthrow that cannibalistic pedophile cabal, and that force of cosmic good has anointed and decided that one man should lead this charge and get this done, and that man is Donald J. Trump. The theory goes on to say that at some point Donald J. Trump is going to institute a amazing kind of cosmic cataclysm in the earth, shaking heaven and earth and all the governments and stuff like that. And this event is routinely referred to as the storm. QAnons are always waiting for the storm, and it's the end times thing. And so you will run into a lot of numbers. I found prominently the idea that President Trump now is in possession of 10,000 sealed indictments, and that all he has to do is give the word, and these 10,000 people, members of the deep state, and deep state is kind of synonymous with this cabal. So these pedophiles, these powerful folks, when he gives the word, they're all going to be arrested, and everything's going to be turned upside down. And so when the storm comes, all the bad guys are going to be dealt with. And the thought is that this is going to leave the world in a brand new sort of pristine place. All the evil folks will be taken care of, and it'll leave the rest of us who are basically good people to lead our lives in a much better way, now that we're not being influenced and controlled by this cabal. So it really is kind of an apocalyptic sort of end times theory, with, instead of Christ coming back, you have Donald Trump giving the word, and the storm happens and sets everything right. Okay, so that's kind of a basic introduction to what I think is true about the phenomenon known as QAnon. I would like to briefly walk through a covenantal critique of the idea. The meta-narrative is plainly unbiblical, and it contains covenantal sort of elements to it, and I would just like to critique those. I'm going to use the 5-point biblical covenant as kind of an outline for this critique. Under the of transcendence, basically this Q character is well, he can never be wrong. Q cannot be falsified, because even when Q has made predictions like this, hang on, be patient, because in a couple of weeks this thing's going to happen, or this other thing's going to happen. Just be patient. Next month this thing's going to happen. And those months and weeks pass by, and none of the stuff that he said actually happens. Well, when he gets challenged on that, the answer is that he had to put out some false information to distract the agents of the cabal and get them covering their wrong bases and stuff like that. So it was all strategy. Part of this is where we get, frankly, the idea that President Trump is always playing 4D chess or 5D chess. That's kind of a QAnon concept, that even when the president seems to do things that are either outright liberal themselves, or they make concessions to liberalism, like his support of the LGBT agenda and executive orders that chip away at the Second Amendment, those sorts of things are excused because he's playing 5D chess, and he's just making moves that are so far ahead of what the cabal thinks that he's going to do, and this is all going to help him topple them when it's time to unleash the storm. So Q can't be falsified, and in extreme versions, President Trump can't be falsified. They don't make any errors. Anything that looks like an error is calculated to misdirect the bad guys. Q is also nearly transcendent in that he's able to reveal things that no normal person can know. He's very much like a biblical prophet in that. And therefore, I think he should be judged by the prescriptions of biblical prophecy. And on that count, Q should have been stoned as a prophet, as a false prophet, long time ago. Under the second head of representation, as I mentioned before in the meta-narrative, the cosmic forces of good have decided apparently that Donald J. Trump is the point man of this whole plan. He's a messiah sort of figure. In fact, in the video I mentioned before, Fall of the Cabal, Trump is referred to there as the master of masters. And if you're familiar with biblical language at all, you understand that when Jesus is called Lord of Lords, that's synonymous. It means the same thing as Master of Masters. And in that same video, it says that Trump is so good at predicting and navigating the minefield of politics and world events that one possibility may be, I know this is going to sound crazy, but one possibility may be that Trump has access to time travel technology. And so he knows the best moves to make because he's already seen what's about to happen and stuff like that. This is how he can always win at 4D chess. I wanted to point out that the Messiah figure here, President Trump, recently retweeted a QAnon tweet. And this tweet said that Trump was the second coming of God and the King of Israel. And Trump retweeted that. Now, Trump's general attitude toward QAnon publicly, I'm assuming that his words are, I'm taking him at his word. If what he says is actually true, then President Trump is really not, he hasn't done any research on QAnon. He hasn't really looked into it, but as he recently told one reporter, his understanding is that QAnons are all great patriots who love America, and they like him quite a bit, and so of course he's going to be a fan of that. But for him to retweet a tweet that says he's the second coming of God and the King of Israel, man, I don't even know what you do with that. How do you maintain the idea that, on a different point, how do you maintain the idea that this is a man who is a Christian? I don't see how you do that. Under ethics, what are QAnons supposed to do in order to be faithful QAnons? Generally, they're supposed to just be patient. President Trump has this. The cosmic forces of good have made sure that everything is ready and the table is set, and really just a lot of the QAnon drops are just urging people to be patient and wait and keep their eyes open and watch. Of course, they're supposed to be big Trump supporters, and it's been shown recently that at a lot of Trump rallies, you'll see Trump language or a QAnon language on a lot of the signs. The third bit of ethical requirements for a QAnon is if you're really going to be a QAnon, you have to play the detective game. And when you see things in a Trump speech or a press conference, when you see a Q drop, your job then is to analyze that and get on your internet machine and look things up and try to figure out what the secret message was. One instance of this that I would like to point out is that there was one press conference where the president was thought to have been holding a bottle of water in a weird way, and that there are screenshots that show he seemed to make a really weird face when he was about to drink out of this water bottle. And this was seized upon by QAnon as probably being a hidden signal to QAnon followers. And so what they did is they get on their internet devices and they start researching things, and they see that in the video the brand of bottled water was Fiji. So they look up the owner of Fiji Water, and they realize that he was the owner of a particular island somewhere, location not important. So he owns this island, but at some point he sells 80% of the island to the two grown heiresses of the Seagram's Whiskey Corporation. So these two ladies have a ton of money, and they buy 80% of the island that was owned by the Fiji Water guy. Well, it also turns out that these two heiresses have connection to the NXIVM cult, which just, it hasn't been too long ago that NXIVM was busted and everybody was arrested, and there was sex trafficking stuff going on there, and so that is held up as an example of, by a QAnon, that's held up as an example of the sort of secret messages that the president sends out during press conferences, because he was holding a particular water bottle in a funny way and made a funny face when he went to go drink from it. That's supposed to signal people that NXIVM is about to be busted. And if you're going to be a good QAnon person, and in fact, frankly, I think this is part of the attraction. It's like an internet game. It's like a research treasure hunt or something like that, where you just win the game by being the one who figures it out. And like all conspiracy theories, the basic rush that you get from believing that you have information that nobody else has, and you're in the know while everybody else is kind of out there asleep. You've taken the red pill, and you're getting it all figured out. In terms of sanctions, the fourth part of the covenant structure, in the QAnon theory, it's all about the storm, and the storm is coming. Only the awakened ones will have the tools to psychologically cope with the upheaval that the storm will bring. I mean, things are not going to be the same. Same heavens and earth and the same sorts of people walking around, but the whole evil structure on which the world has been built will be demolished. The bad guys will all be exposed and punished. Those 10,000 sealed indictments will result in their arrest and their ultimate punishment and destruction. And so if you follow QAnon, you're going to be ready for this, and you'll slide into this new idyllic era without much heartache. If you're hit with this stuff blindside, it's going to be a great psychological trauma to you at the very least. The fifth topic of the covenant is about secession and how this goes on, and of course it ends in this new creation that we're talking about, and it's always right around the corner. Since I've been paying attention to what I see of QAnon online, I've seen this storm predicted. It's going on years. I mean, it is years. And so this continues to be just right around the corner, like the rapture or something like that. It's just right around. You just wait a little while. All the signs are lining up. The table is set. It's, hold on. And here we go. And it never happens. And it's never going to happen. And so my concern is that as Christian people trying to think rightly about the world around us, we can't buy into a false, unbiblical meta-narrative. The Bible would have told us if the world is ruled by secret pedophile cannibals. But what does it tell us? That Jesus Christ has been seated at the right hand of God, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and every name that is named, both in this age and in the one to come. And that since he's been seated at the right hand of God, from that time, he is now waiting until all of his enemies are made his footstool. Jesus Christ is winning. He has been winning the whole time. And yes, there is great evil in the world. Yes, some of these conspiracy theories are nasty and they're true. These things have happened. It's true. But the Christian has no need, and in fact, it would be unfaithful for the Christian person to believe that because of the reality of evil, that must mean that God is not on his throne and Jesus is not really footstooling his enemies. And so it's a challenge to your faith. I understand it is. It's so much easier to look at all the bad news and the fact that the internet shows you things that a generation ago you would have never heard about. Makes it seem like the world is getting so much worse and worse and all of that, when you would have just slid by in blissful ignorance before. I understand it's hard to deal with, and I understand people being fearful, but that's not the faithful option. And so I'd encourage you to just take a look at these things yourself. Remember the biblical injunction that we're supposed to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Thanks for listening, you guys. Bye.